He's barely in the original trilogy, but bounty hunter Boba Fett is still one of the Star Wars saga's most iconic characters. From his unusual origins to his presumed death and beyond to his Disney Plus revival, there's enough Boba Fett lore out there to fill a Sarlacc pit. Let's dive in. Before Boba's story can be told, we have to go back to events that predate his first chronological on-screen appearance. Over a decade before the Clone Wars, Jedi Master Sifo Dyas foresees a terrible darkness slowly spreading across the galaxy. Despite his attempts to warn the Jedi Council, he is ignored and removed from his place in the Order. After that rejection, he strikes a deal with the cloners on the sea planet of Kamino to create a grand army of the Republic after seeing thousands of star systems join the Separatists. The premonitions of galactic conflict alarm the Kaminians, so the cloners anxiously agree to use the Mandalorian bounty hunter Jango Fett as a genetic template. The Sith get wind of his plans, so they decide to create the perfect storm to grant themselves control over the clone army. In exchange for his genetic template, Jango Fett negotiates for a single and altered clone, a genetically pure boy designated Alpha, whom he would keep for himself. Living on Kamino, Jango raises Alpha as if he were his own son, renaming him Boba so as to separate him further from his clone brethren. Unlike the clones who are trained from their youth to become obedient soldiers, Boba is taught to think independently and learns the basics of bounty hunting from his father. Most fans saw Boba Fett in 1980's The Empire Strikes Back, but thanks to Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars, he's been given a pretty in-depth history that extends far beyond his bounty hunting profession. Prior to the start of the Clone Wars, Jango Fett is hired to assassinate Senator Padme Amidala, the eventual wife of one Anakin Skywalker. In the Clone Wars, Jango is described by the Mandalorian Prime Minister in less than flattering terms, insinuating that Fett may not actually be Mandalorian himself. When the Clone Wars came out in 2008, the story went that Jango Fett was indeed Mandalorian, but the planet's officials were desperate to hide it. But in 2014, when Disney announced that the Star Wars expanded universe was no longer considered canon, Jango lost his original backstory, even though the Clone Wars remained. Thankfully, the Disney Plus series The Mandalorian set the record straight once and for all. In Chapter 14, The Tragedy, an aged Boba Fett reveals the chain code of his armor, which reveals that Jango Fett was once a Mandalorian foundling after all.
Your father was a foundling.
Yes.
Following an attempt made on Padme Amidala's life, Obi-Wan Kenobi ends up on Kamino where he meets Jango Fett. Before long, Jango and Boba are in the process of making their escape, and a fight breaks out between Obi-Wan and Jango outside the Slave One. The Fetts escape, but not before Obi-Wan is able to secure a homing device to the hull of their ship. He catches up to the pair outside Geonosis, and the battle continues in an asteroid field. Thinking they've outrun Obi-Wan, the Fetts take refuge on the planet, along with Count Dooku and his separatist army. The entire sequence serves two purposes. It demonstrates just what the Fett starship can do in combat, and it sets up Boba to be his father's replacement in the universe. Not only can he handle a ship's controls, but he's also pretty bloodthirsty, especially when it comes to the Jedi. When the Jedi storm Geonosis to come to Obi-Wan's aid, a battle ensues that brings them face to face with the full force of Count Dooku's army. Boba Fett watches from the sidelines as his father enters the fray, acting first as Dooku's personal bodyguard and eventually going head-on against Jedi Master Mace Windu and an unruly Reek. After a not-so-impressive fight, Windu takes Jango out with a single swing of his lightsaber, separating his head from his body and leaving Boba with nothing left of his father except a helmet that should probably get a good cleaning. Boba vows vengeance on Mace Windu for his father's death and disappears into the vastness of the Star Wars universe, just as the new Grand Army of the Republic swoops in to save the Jedi and usher in an all-out war. It's during this time that Boba Fett meets up with several intergalactic bounty hunters. The most notable of these dangerous characters is Aurra Sing, a former acquaintance of Jango's. Aurra essentially adopts Boba, allowing him to work on her crew while teaching him the ins and outs of the trade. In the Clone Wars, Boba's real introduction to his father's line of work is rough, and this made all the more difficult by Aurra's heartless approach to business. Anyone who crosses her is killed without a second thought. And although Boba sees himself as part of her inner circle, it eventually becomes clear that all he is to her is a means of advancing her own personal interests. When he's no longer of any use to her, Aurra turns on Boba the same way she's turned on countless others in her past. But before all that, she does offer Boba help in one very specific regard. Part of Boba Fett's arrangement with Aurra Sing involves a revenge plot on Mace Windu in an effort to avenge his father's death. Having held on to his anger toward the Jedi since Attack of the Clones, the young Fett is anxious to finally put his plan into motion. Boba's first attempt on Mace Windu's life involves a bounty hunter posing as a clone cadet to gain entrance to the Endurance, a Republic cruiser that houses the Jedi Master he's been searching for. Boba plants an explosive device in Windu's quarters, but the assassination attempt fails when an unlucky clone trooper trips the device instead. At this point, Boba decides the best course of action is to take out the ship's reactor, escape alongside a group of clone cadets, and then completely abandon them in the middle of space the second Aurra shows up to rescue him. Solid plan, even if it is dangerously cruel. But Boba finds himself getting attached to his fellow clone siblings, making it difficult for him to sabotage his family. While the idea of leaving his new friends to die takes a minute to accept, he ultimately does. The bounty hunter life is a hard one, and it doesn't allow room for such trivial things as friends. Not willing to just let things go after his first failed attempt, Boba Fett decides to have another go at Mace Windu, this time by leaving a sabotage Mandalorian helmet in the wreckage of the crashed Endurance. Again, his plan fails, but it isn't because of some random expendable stormtrooper. Mace is able to put two and two together seconds before the device is set to go off, so he force pulls Anakin away just far enough to keep the blast from being lethal. Thinking his plan has succeeded, Boba convinces Aurra Sing to return to the crash site by telling her that Count Dooku will pay a higher bounty if they're able to turn over the Jedi's head. He also picks a fight with another bounty hunter and asserts himself as a guy who's been taking all the risks. If being an unruly teenager sounds bad, imagine being around one with a homicidal streak. They're stopped by R2-D2, who's able to repel the bounty hunter's advances in the downed Venator, and eventually returns with help from Coruscant. At this point, Boba Fett knows he's failed twice to kill the man responsible for his father's murder, and it's starting to get to him. Aurra Sing decides the best thing to do is to kill one of the clone hostages they've been saving for Count Dooku and send the footage to the Jedi Council, along with the demands that Mace Windu face Boba. In response, the Jedi dispatch a couple of their own to track down the bounty hunters. On Florum, Boba, Aurra, and the rest of the crew are confronted by Plo Koon and Ahsoka Tano. After a quick skirmish, Boba does what he does best and sets another bomb off, but the blast only allows for Aurra to escape, so she abandons the kid in order to save herself. Realizing he's been deserted by the only person he had left in the universe, Boba comes to understand that maybe vengeance isn't the best life path. He's arrested, and although he admits his wrongdoing, he refuses to ever forgive Mace Windu. By the time of the Clone Wars Season 4 episode Deception, Boba is still serving his sentence. It's a quick one-and-done moment, but it gives us an interesting glimpse into what Boba has been up to since his arrest. After Obi-Wan Kenobi takes on the identity of a criminal named Reiko Hardeen in order to infiltrate Count Dooku's inner circle, the bounty hunter Cad Bane hires Boba to interrogate the disguised Kenobi. Understandably, Obi-Wan keeps his distance, not wanting to hurt anyone unnecessarily, especially a young boy who seems in over his head. After a brief fight, Kenobi makes a getaway, leaving Boba and his friend Bossk in the dust. Immediately after these events, Boba Fett heads up his own outfit of outlaws called Crate's Claw. When one of Boba's crew is killed in a seedy Tatooine bar by former Sith assassin Asajj Ventress, Bossk convinces her to join them in an upcoming assignment.
You just killed one of our team.
She and Boba immediately butt heads, as she thinks he's too young and inexperienced to lead this band of mercenaries. It turns out Ventress is sort of right. Over the course of their assignment, the other bounty hunters are lost and the pair wind up fighting over what to do with the actual bounty. By this time, Boba still has no idea how to best someone with Force abilities, so he's quickly overpowered, left to spend the following years wallowing in his hatred. Boba Fett begins his training with Cad Bane to become a better bounty hunter. Eventually, though, their partnership turns sour. In an unproduced episode of The Clone Wars, Boba and Bane engage in a standoff that would have explained the trademark dent in Boba's helmet. Though it never made it to air, the battle scene was nearly completed and would have served as a basis for their eventual rivalry seen at the end of the Book of Boba Fett. Unbeknownst to Boba, he has a female counterpart, a young clone of Jango Fett dubbed Omega, whose genetic material is as pure Fett DNA as Boba's own. Aided by Clone Force 99, Omega is kept safe from the newly formed Galactic Empire looking to use her. Whether Boba ever learned about his sister remains a mystery. Not every job goes as smoothly as Boba would like. While some bounties are quick and easy, others are a bit more complicated. occasionally damaging our favorite mercenary's reputation. One such job is chronicled in the Marvel Comics series Star Wars Bounty Hunters, which tells the story of Boba Fett's botched Corellian job about 10 years before A New Hope. Hiring Boba, the heir to the Mourner's Whale Syndicate puts an assassination team together to take out a target on Corellia before things go south. It all gets a bit sticky when a member of the team named Nakano Lash takes out their employer, which pits the full wrath of the Mourner's Whale Syndicate against them. Hoping to kill Lash for her betrayal, Boba goes off-script, putting him at odds with another teammate, the cyborg Bylert Valance, who just so happens to be Lash's protege. Because of this job, Boba's reputable work ethic is singed, and the bounty hunter goes into hiding for a time. It's only after capturing fellow bounty hunter Cage Vander a year later, as detailed in the video game Star Wars Jedi Survivor, that Boba is ushered back into the bounty hunting community's good graces. This capture opened the door for some other high-paying opportunities, including one that made him most famous among Star Wars fans. By the time the Galactic Civil War officially commenced, Boba Fett was hired by the notorious gangster Jabba the Hutt on Tatooine. Back on the desert planet, the bounty hunter makes waves around Mos Eisley, where he frequently enforces the Hutt's will on his enemies. Before the Empire sets its sights on two droids wandering around the desert with hidden Death Star plans, Boba travels to Coruscant to take out a handful of rebel spies. However, because he disintegrates them, leaving no trace of their bodies, Darth Vader refuses to pay. During the events of A New Hope, Boba Fett acts as Jabba's enforcer when the gangster confronts Han Solo about his enormous debt. The short story, Added Muscle, also reveals that Boba was planning on leaving Tatooine during this time. But after catching wind of the Empire's hunt for R2-D2 and C-3PO, he decides to investigate. It's during this endeavor that Boba tracks the droids across the desert, eventually concluding that their time on the Lars Moisture farm is what prompted the Empire to kill Luke Skywalker's uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. Additionally, he also deduces that there was a third member of the Lars household who likely traveled with the droids, but they wouldn't meet until later. At some point during the rule of the Empire, Boba Fett finds himself on Karajam, a world on the Outer Rim where he's hired to capture fellow bounty hunter Zingo Gabnir. As chronicled in the Marvel comics Star Wars Age of Rebellion Boba Fett, he gets his prey, which earns him the respect of the press locals. One man in particular pleads with Boba for his help in liberating their village, attempting to appeal to the good inside. Instead, the bounty hunter turns on the do-gooder, recognizing that the man is worth plenty of credits himself. Not every Boba Fett story ends with him as a villain. He may work for them often, but sometimes the goodness within him peeks through. In Dark Horse Comics Star Wars Hyperspace Stories Issue 7, Boba reluctantly takes a job for a young Wookiee named Vivine. Vivine is the daughter of Senator Yarua, who worked alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Padme Amidala during the Clone Wars. Though her father died saving her life, his memory lives on in the small doll that had gifted her, one she needs Boba's help to find. Sadly, Boba spends the entire issue saving Vivine from other bounty hunters who want to capture her for the Empire, and thus her doll is never actually found. But remembering how precious his father's armor is to him, Boba tells the younger Wookiee to never stop searching. Not long after Luke Skywalker blows up the Death Star, a defeated and humiliated Darth Vader hires Boba Fett and the Wookiee bounty hunter Black Krrsantan for some off-the-books jobs he can't trust a stormtrooper with. Under Vader's thumb, Boba's new mission is to track down the young rebel pilot who made that impossible shot and bring him to the Dark Lord. Oh, and to apprehend the Millennium Falcon too. Knowing Han Solo's usual haunts, Boba quickly connects the smuggler with the crazy old wizard Ben Kenobi while at the Mos Eisley Cantina. There he captures a young moisture farmer who spills the beans on Luke's identity. This takes him to Kenobi's desert home just in time for Luke's return. Hoping to find some of old Ben's Jedi texts to advance his own training, Luke is surprised by Boba Fett's arrival. Blinded by one of Boba's weapons, Luke fights valiantly against the experienced bounty hunter and mistakes him for a stormtrooper. Luke's connection to the Force gives him an advantage, and after a seriously bloody battle, the young Skywalker gains the upper hand and escapes with what he came for. Defeated, Boba reports Luke's identity to Darth Vader, who finally recognizes that he and Padme had a son after all. Near the end of the Galactic Empire, Boba Fett becomes one of the most sought-after bounty hunters in the galaxy. In The Empire Strikes Back, Boba continues his mission to track down the Millennium Falcon, but Vader wants to make sure his employee doesn't fall back into his old habits.
You are free to use any methods necessary, but I want them alive. No disintegrations.
Naturally, Vader didn't just hire one bounty hunter for the job. He hired several, including members of Boba's former outfit, Krait's Claw. The short story Wait For It explains that Bossk and Dengar wanted to form an alliance with Boba, reliving old times. But the Mandalorian armor-clad hunter emphasizes his need for the extra credits and opts to work solo. It turns out that this is the right move, as Boba is able to monitor Solo and his crew on their way to Bespin, and he follows closely behind in Slave One. Warning Darth Vader ahead of time, Boba makes sure that the Empire arrives to occupy Cloud City before the Millennium Falcon lands, setting the perfect trap for the elusive rebel smuggler. Turning the rebels over to Darth Vader, Boba makes a deal with the Sith Lord that allows him to deliver Han Solo personally to his other employer, Jabba the Hutt. This of course means freezing Han Solo in carbonite in front of his friends, thereby creating one of the most stylish wall pieces in the galaxy.
What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me.
The Empire will compensate you if he dies. Put him in!
After capturing Luke's friends and freezing Solo, Vader gives Boba Fett permission to leave with his bounty. His job for the Empire is now complete. Aided by a band of stormtroopers, Boba parades the frozen Solo through Cloud City. But he is soon pursued by the young Skywalker and his friends. Unfortunately for the rebels, Boba Fett loads Han Solo above Slave One and blasts off into space, heading back toward Tatooine to collect his bounty. But before Boba could make it to Jabba's palace, there was a brief detour or three to make along the way. Set between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Marvel's Star Wars Comics hosted a large-scale crossover event spanning throughout all of their biggest titles, called War of the Bounty Hunters. This conflict kicks off after Boba first tracks down and battles Nakano Lash, the same bounty hunter who had double-crossed him years prior. Leaving Lash for dead, Boba continues on to deliver Solo to Jabba. Just one problem: the carbonite matrix that the smuggler is frozen inside of proves unstable. To fix it, Boba makes a pit stop on Nar Shaddaa and fights in a local gladiator arena in order to pay for the repairs on Solo's prison. Competing undercover as Beskar brawler Jango in honor of his father, Boba wins, but fails to get the credits he was after. Returning to Solo, he finds the smuggler's carbonite frozen body stolen. Naturally, Boba does what any good bounty hunter would do. He hunts down his prey. Things only get worse though, as Jabba believes that Boba sold Solo to another buyer, forcing the Hutts to pay a high-priced bounty on Boba's head. In reality, Solo was stolen by the criminal syndicate Crimson Dawn, specifically under the orders of Solo's former lover, Qi'ra. Her intentions aren't pure either though. Qi'ra decides to sell Solo at auction, thus putting Boba in quite the predicament. While attempting to reclaim Han Solo and restore his reputation, Boba is attacked by 4 LOM and Zuckuss, whom he quickly dispatches. Learning about the auction for Solo, Boba flies to Jakara to retrieve the frozen smuggler, only to run into Bossk, who attempts to appeal to their long history. Ruthless as always, Boba leaves Bossk out in the cold as a warning to those who might get in his way. Upon infiltrating the auction, Boba devises a plan to steal back Solo, only to be confronted by Princess Leia, Chewbacca, and Lando Calrissian. After a tussle with Chewie, Lando offers the bounty hunter the chance to nab Solo for the rebellion, but Boba refuses, noting that his code won't let him suddenly switch sides on a job. As Jabba the Hutt wins the auction, Darth Vader arrives and claims Han Solo as his own, hoping to use the smuggler as bait for Luke once more. Forcing an uneasy alliance with Valance, who hates him for all but killing his mentor Nakano Lash, Boba intercepts Solo from the Imperial fleet and reclaims his bounty. It's not exactly a piece of cake, but his knowledge of Imperial systems helps the operation go smoothly. Unsurprisingly, Boba betrays Valance along the way, before finally delivering Solo to Jabba in person, demanding full payment for his services. Boba Fett's days as a Star Wars Galaxy's bounty hunter MVP are short-lived. In Return of the Jedi, set possibly up to a year after War of the Bounty Hunters, the Mandalorian clone seems at first to be enjoying his victory over Han Solo, hanging out with Jabba in his palace and making sure things don't get too crazy. Naturally, things go awry when Luke Skywalker fails a rescue and finds himself sentenced to die in Jabba's Great Pit of Carkoon. Before being fed to Jabba's favorite sand monster, the Sarlacc pit, Luke breaks free, so Boba steps in to try and thwart the rebels' escape. Call it unlucky, dumb, or just plain outmatched, but in spite of Boba's high-tech gear, this conflict doesn't go well for the bounty hunter. Instead, he winds up falling into the Sarlacc pit himself after his jetpack is accidentally damaged by a blinded Han Solo. Following these events, which also resulted in Jabba's death at the hands of Princess Leia, it's generally thought that Boba Fett died here on Tatooine. From here on, nobody hears much from the would-be Mandalorian bounty hunter, at least for a number of years. Talk about an anticlimactic ending. Except it isn't the end. To the delight of Star Wars fans everywhere, Boba Fett, just as he did in the now non-canonical Star Wars Expanded Universe, survives the Sarlacc, even if it takes him a while to break free. In the flashback scene in the Book of Boba Fett premiere, the bounty hunter wakes up sometime after the events of Han Solo's rescue and desperately burns an enormous hole into the creature's insides. Of course, he eventually claws his way out of the beastly pit before passing out face first in the sand. From there, Boba only awakens as Jawas strip him of his armor, leaving him for dead. Though Boba would remain in the desert for a while, his father's Mandalorian armor would eventually be claimed by Tatooine Marshal Cobb Vanth, who would use it to defend his hometown of Mos Pelgo. Meanwhile, Boba is found by a band of Tusken Raiders, who claim him as their prisoner alongside an unnamed Rodian. Turns out Boba Fett doesn't always have the best luck. After a failed escape attempt, Boba gains the respect of the tribe after saving a young Tusken from a reptilian sand beast that roams the desert floor. After it kills his fellow captive, Boba strangles the creature before it can kill his child captor, thus earning himself a place within the tribe. Upon being accepted into the Tusken Raider tribe, Boba Fett quickly adapts to their ways. This includes their culture, their occupations, and their weaponry, most notably how to properly wield a gaffi stick.
I am holding it the same.
From the time he was tossed into the Sarlacc pit to the time he began to thrive within the Tusken tribe, nearly a year had passed. After being burned by so many would-be families throughout his life, this was the first time Boba felt as if he truly belonged somewhere. It wasn't until the Pike Syndicate began to disrupt their way of life, including killing a number of Tuskens, that Boba decided to take matters into his own hands to protect his new people. After training some Tusken warriors how to ride on speeder bikes, Boba leads an assault on a cargo train carrying spice. Though the Pikes fight back, they're no match for Boba Fett and his newfound tribe, who soon overpower them. Vowing that the Pike Syndicate must pay a toll to the Tuskens to continue their operations, the tribe celebrates. As a gift for his efforts, the Tusken chief presents Boba with a small lizard and initiates a very psychedelic vision quest. In his vision, Boba sees his childhood on Kamino and his time in the Sarlacc pit, which reminds him of the life he once lived, as well as his father's legacy. Inspired by his vision, Boba Fett decides to return to Mos Eisley to ensure that the Pike Syndicate treats the Tuskens well. The Pikes don't exactly refuse, but they don't pay Boba either, since they're already paying protection money to a rival gang.
The Kintan Striders have already collected protection money for the same territory you lay claim to.
Boba vows to handle it, but upon returning to his tribe's camp, he finds them all dead, including the chief and the young Tusken he'd befriended. Unbeknownst to Boba, the Pike Syndicate had them all killed during his absence, framing the Kintan Striders gang for the massacre. Heartbroken, Boba burns the bodies on a pyre, takes a bantha, and heads off into the desert. It's during his grief that he finds a wounded Fennec Shand and returns her to Mos Eisley, paying for the cybernetic body modifications that save her life. Owing him a debt, Shand agrees to help Boba retrieve his ship from Jabba's palace. Then the two of them take out all of Fett's enemies. They start with the Kintan Striders, whom Boba still believes responsible for the Tusken deaths, and they destroy the Sarlacc pit not long after. Boba sure knows how to enact his revenge. Boba had hoped to find his armor at the pit, but he was quickly disappointed. Thankfully, he discovers that Cobb Vanth, who had worn his armor for a time, had given it to a Mandalorian. As it turns out, this Mandalorian was none other than, well, the Mandalorian, the helmeted hero from the show of the same name. Din Djarin was once a foundling, but he now belongs to a certain set of the Mandalorians who hold tightly to the ancient creeds. Tracking Djarin to Tython, Boba and Shand threaten the life of Djarin's own foundling, the young Force-sensitive Grogu, which puts the Beskar-plated Mandalorian on guard. Boba demands his armor back, but Djarin only agrees to talk when Shand, whom had encountered previously, puts her weapon down. Before long, the two bounty hunters come to an agreement. Boba reclaims his armor, but now he wears his Tusken garb underneath. In exchange for the armor, Djarin asks that Boba and Shand help him protect Grogu from the Imperial forces led by Moff Gideon, who wishes to use his child's Force abilities for nefarious purposes. Ever since Boba Fett lived among the Tusken people, he has rediscovered the concepts of honor and respect. It's because of this that he accepts his new mission, now standing against the Empire he once contracted for. Tragically, it's not enough. Despite the trio's best efforts, Grogu is taken by a band of dark troopers who destroy Djarin's ship, the Razor Crest, and flee the scene. Thankfully, Boba still has his ship, so he uses it to get the three of them off-world and on the move to rescue the potential Jedi recruit. Allying themselves with New Republic Marshal Cara Dune and the mercenary Migs Mayfeld, the team comes up with a plan to retrieve the child. But before they can follow through with it, they need to figure out where he actually is. They soon find themselves at an Imperial refinery on Morak, where Djarin and Mayfield must pretend to be Imperial troopers. It's especially difficult for Djarin, who is forced to remove his helmet in opposition to his Mandalorian creed. After attaining Grogu's location, Boba Fett intercepts Gideon's cruiser, while his allies, including new Mandalorian recruits Bo-Katan Kryze and Koska Reeves, infiltrate the ship to rescue their little green friend. The plan ultimately proves successful, especially with the help of Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker, who arrives just in time. Chapter 16, The Rescue, ends with Djarin and Grogu reunited, thanks in no small part to Boba Fett's assistance. Immediately following his job with Din Djarin, Boba Fett returns to Tatooine, kills Bib Fortuna, and takes a seat on Jabba's throne. Ready to take over the Empire, Boba faces the first challengers to his newfound position, the Hutt twins. As the self-proclaimed daimyo of Mos Espa, Boba vows to rule not with fear as Jabba had, but with honor and respect as he learned from the Tuskens. After a few weeks, news has spread that Boba Fett is in fact alive and well, and his enemies aren't happy to hear it. The Hutt twins, cousins of dear old Jabba, don't take this change terribly well, using the Wookiee black Kasanten to try to interrogate and later assassinate Boba. The twins attempt to overpower the Mandalorian armor-wearing daimyo to no avail. Not wanting to start a war over a worthless rock, the twins leave Tatooine, offering up a new Rancor as a gift for Boba's palace and releasing Chrysantan from his contract. Impressed with the Wookiee's resolve, Boba hires his would-be assassin as an enforcer alongside the gang of cyborgs he'd previously conscripted. Now the leader of an impressive force, Boba Fett challenges the Pike Syndicate's authority and attempts to convince Mos Espa's other crime lords to fight alongside him, but they refuse. Recognizing their fear of the Pikes, Boba convinces them to at least remain neutral as he deals with the liberation of the city. Foreseeing a turf war, Shand convinces Din Djarin to aid in their conflict. It isn't long before the Pikes get wind of Boba Fett's plan and hire an enforcer to make sure that he's cut off from any additional resources. Their choice? Cad Bane, Boba's former mentor and the most notable bounty hunter from the Clone Wars era.
Boba Fett is a cold-blooded killer who worked for the Empire.
After Din Djarin convinces Marshal Cobb Vanth of Freetown to help Boba take on the Pikes, Bane arrives and demands that none of the people of Freetown assist his adversary in any way. Then he takes out Vanth and his deputy. From there, Bane travels to Mos Espa, where he reveals to Boba that the Pikes were the ones who killed his Tusken tribe. Enraged, Boba nearly attacks his former mentor, but he manages to stop himself with an impressive amount of restraint. Sadly, his newfound honor isn't enough to gain the upper hand. Mos Espa's other criminal forces unsurprisingly betray him, and Boba's forces are nearly depleted. Thankfully, the people of Freetown come anyway, as does Grogu, and Boba's faction soon overpowers the Pikes. This all leads to a final confrontation between Boba and Bane that mirrors their previously unfinished duel from the Clone Wars. Boba uses his new Tusken training to disarm and dispatch Bane, leaving him seemingly dead in the street. Following the turf war, Boba Fett reigns supreme over Mos Espa, as Fennec Shand assassinates the heads of the Pike Syndicate. Despite all the violence and bloodshed, it's a relatively happy ending for the fan favorite.